my intention today is to test a few theses regarding markets as central regulating mechanisms in capitalism, and to also make a few points about reading capital politically. Now, I imagined this talk in two parts. Firstly, I would like to say a few words about the mechanism of competition. Secondly, I'd like to show how competition becomes a form of domination, and then in the end I'd like to reconsider this form of domination in capitalism, this notion of domination. So, let me start with John Locke, who makes a distinction regarding essences. He says things have real essences and nominal essences, where real essence implies certain facts about the internal structure of things, while nominal essences are basically an outside relation of this thing, like abstract idea we make when we compare shared qualities. And my proposal is that we can view competition as an internal essence of capitalist markets, and on the other hand, I would like to offer as the nominal essence of these markets a duplication of competition as in the form of imitation. So we have markets, and these markets are defined by competition and imitation. Okay, so furthermore, let's assume competition is more important than exchange. I'm not saying it replaced exchange, I'm saying it's gaining an ever more independent existence. Now, I'd also like to propose that competition is in fact a form of judgment that comes to the fore in neoliberalism, and this would mean that neoliberalism as theory and practice simply reduces every judgment concerning markets to the notion of competition. Recently, quite a few authors proposed this elevation of the notion of competition, one of them being Anwar Shaikh in his recent book, Capitalism, Competition, Conflict and Crisis. And he basically says there are three forms of competition present in capitalism. One is the perfect competition, which we connect with neoclassical theory. That would mean general equilibrium, rational agents, cost curves, and so on. The other form is the imperfect competition, which is connected to the Keynesian and post-Keynesian economy, and the main thing about this is that it's formed in relation to the perfect competition. So the third one that interests me, and also Shaikh and other critical theorists, is of course real competition, which is the one Marx describes, and it means chaos, anarchy of the market, and so on. Now, Marx actually had an intention of writing a thesis on competition. We can see this in, it's evident in a letter to Engels. I didn't write it out, but, and in Marx, competition comes before the general rate of profit, so we should keep that in mind. And of course, Marx mentions competition on several occasions, and I picked two quotes. Here's a quote from Grundrisse, and the other one from volume 1. Capital. So if I just read it for you. Conceptually, competition is nothing other than the inner nature of capital, its essential character appearing in and realized as the reciprocal interaction of many capitals with one another. The inner tendency as external necessity. And the other quote from Das Kapital, the splitting up of the total social capital into many individual capitals, or the repulsion of its fractions one from another, is counteracted by their attraction. Now, what we have here, and this is my point, is basically a fairly Hegelian language. This inner tendency as external necessity, also repulsion and attraction. We can find this in Hegel's Science of Logic, of course. And just keep that in mind for later on. And let me just repeat, we have competition and imitation, and there's a dual relationship here. And again, this is really nothing new, you know. For example, I mean, we find these dualisms in critical theory all the time. For example, Adorno, talks about exchange as an illusion because it is just and unjust at the same time. And we would find this in, I think, Backhaus and many others also. We could also find the proof of this generalization in empirical examples. For example, the relation between the center and periphery, where peripheral states are supposed to imitate the center states, and this imitation is elevated into theory and so on, but in reality it's a relation of competition and exploitation. So, my question here is, can we turn this logic around? You know? can we arrange a market to function like a state? And this is the question, and I'd like to propose a thesis at this point, and I would try to keep it in mind or elaborate it through the rest of my talk, or maybe you can comment it later. And the thesis is this: the will of the state should be subjected to the market in such a way that the market itself is redefined through this subjection. So where am I taking this? The idea is quite simple. It states that capital is a work of political theory. And why am I saying this? It looks a bit controversial or perhaps contradictory, this thesis. But why am I saying this? Because it seems to me that we found ourselves in sort of a dichotomy. On the one side of the critical theory, we have this value form boys who say, it's all abstract domination, non-personal, everything's going on behind our backs, we can do much here. And on the other side, we have this, political leftist Bolsheviks who would constantly like to seize the means of production, go into politics, and we watch them do that, and we watch their beliefs erode, and so on, over and over again. So I'm proposing something in between. And I mentioned Hegel before briefly when I spoke about competition, and I want to revisit this through these two old questions. One is the relation between the state and the market, and the other one is the relation between Marx and Hegel. And both were talked about a lot, I think, and written about. And I think one of the most productive things that Marx and Hegel have in common is actually a question. And that question is, why is economy political? And I think reading both through this question can be productive. Furthermore, I think we can find an outline of an answer to this question in one of the most famous footnotes in Volume 1 of Capital, which you probably know, and it's a footnote about a king. So it's this. Such expressions of relations in general, called by Hegel reflex categories, form a very curious class. For instance, one man is king only because other men stand in relation of subjects to him. They, on the contrary, imagine that they are subjects because he is king. And there's another footnote that appears a bit earlier in Volume 1, and it says, in a sort of way, it is with man as with commodities. Since he comes into the world neither with a looking glass in his hand, nor as a Fichtean philosopher, to whom I is sufficient, man first sees and recognizes himself in other men. So the point, and the word I'm looking for, is domination, abstract, non-personal, but still functioning through persons. And workers and capitalists are all subjected to this form of domination. It does not discriminate. So our colleague Primož Kraševec recently wrote about the internalization of class struggle in neoliberal capitalism, about the worker being an entrepreneur of himself, about being the owner of his own means of production, and so on. And also, surprisingly enough, he suggested that the profit-centered perspective should be replaced by competition-centered perspective, and where, of course, we should keep in mind that the two perspectives do not exclude each other. So the point I came to here is that competition is this essence where capitalist domination comes from. And it seems we're back at square one. We have competition as an inner essence that functions as an outside necessity. And we can say now that there is no outside of capitalism, again, because the outside is always already internal, or as Dupuy says at one point, the outside emerges inside the market. And if we rethink about the things in intellectual history, those breaks, critical breaks like Freud, Darwin, Copernic, it was always the outside that determined the inside. It was always something alien that messed with the subject. And perhaps this is the answer to why it is so hard to think critically today, because the outside is always internal. And I don't think we should just give up on this point. I think we should look for a break and a redefinition or a reconstitution of the notion of the outside. Now, I don't know how to do this, but William Clare Roberts, an author who recently wrote a book, Marx's Inferno, he proposes a Republican reading of Marx, where the concept of freedom as non-domination is presented as a guiding principle of political institutions. And this redefinition of the notion of the outside is what I've termed before in this thesis I proposed, the subjugation of the state to the market in such a manner that the market is redefined. I'd just like to finish this up with another thought of this subjugation, and it's related to Hegel. In his philosophy, right, he confronts the state and the market. Of course, market is chaos, anarchy, the spectacle of contingency, and the state is this concrete freedom, and so on. But in between, Hegel puts a theory of corporation, among other things. So what he says is this. In accordance with this definition of its functions, a corporation has the right, under the surveillance of the public authority, A, to look after its own interests within its own sphere, to co-opt members, qualified objectively by the requisite skill and rectitude, to a number fixed by the general structure of society, to protect its members against particular contingencies, to provide the education requisite to fit others to become members. In short, its right is to come on the scene like a second family for its members, while civil society, that is the market, can only be an indeterminate sort of family because it comprises everyone and so is farther removed from individuals and their special exigencies. In other words, corporation as an institution is a step away from the anarchy of the market towards the state as this concrete freedom. And competition on the market, which produces egoism, on the other hand, we have corporation as an institution of freedom and morality that counters this egoism. And so the corporation is an instrument of the general interest in the sphere of individuality. Now there's also this book that's coming out soon by Sven Ilmers, and one of the things he says is that communitarianism is on the right track when it reminds us on the Republican tradition of self-government. And I also mentioned William Clare Roberts, who basically came to the same conclusion. So let me also conclude with one more thing. What was, again, the problem with socialism? Either it promoted self-management on the factory level and left the state to be left alone, demolished by market forces, or it organized production on the state level, planned it, but left the factories in a capitalist state now, enforcing capitalism on the factory level. So the problem is, we need both, that's the problem. And all I'm saying is simply that the time when even the state is on the market, in order to truly make a step towards the state as a form of concrete freedom, we need to develop institutions that would model the state we do not yet have. And a corporation as a state on the lower level is where we can start thinking about this and where economy can be grasped, I think, politically. So, yeah, thank you.
Okay.